Good morning. I have 9 o'clock, didn't hear the bell yet, but I think I just heard it. Need to remember all of those that are on the sick list. Brother Bert, Terry checked on him yesterday, said he seems to be doing some better, but anxious to come home, but don't know when that's going to be. If you saw your emails, the Moores, they're still out dealing with the flu. Need to keep those in our prayers. Barbara getting over the wreck, and anyone else on the sick injured list or those traveling? Yes, sir. And Barbara now has the flu. So. If it's not one thing, it's 6 others, right? Okay. Brother Kyle, would you lead us in a prayer, please?
Sure. Let's pray. Father God, thank you so much for this opportunity to come together as a church and learn about you. Father, help us to focus our minds during this Bible class and learn from your word. Father, be with those who have been mentioned as sick. Be with Brother Turner and Miss Barbara as they both try to get stronger from Mr. Burt from his hospitalization and Miss Barbara from her accident. Father, help us always to be ready with an answer, to be a light in the community, to show others that we're living for you each day and that we're happy to do so. Father, help us to reach out to those around us each day and encourage those within the church. In Christ's name we pray. Amen.
Don't know about you, but I personally have 66 favorite books of the Bible. And when it comes between the book of Daniel and the book of Revelation, it's a toss-up of which one I like the most, or which I spend a lot of time in. The book of Daniel, there are many commentaries out there, many good ones, some bad. But if I had my choice of only one, it would be Daniel, a prophet of God, that was written by Brother Rex Turner Sr., and it was published by Southern Christian. I believe it was 1993 when he published that, or when it was published. And Sister Anita has been kind enough to check, and Amridge has some on hand. So the elders would like to have that book in every family's library. So if you need that book or want that book, if you would raise your hand so we could get a count. This offer goes to those in this class, our members. For those streaming, we have to limit it to members of this congregation. So raise your hand if you need one or want one of those books. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13. Okay. We'll order a few extra just to make sure that everybody gets one, but that gives us a pretty good head count or hand count on who wants one. Like I said, Sister Anita was kind enough to check and said there's enough that I can do, or the elders can do that. So don't know when that will be. My truck goes to the vehicle hospital tomorrow. Nothing serious, just regular maintenance. But I'll be off the road tomorrow, so we'll figure out how to get those books up here. But we'll be in was in Daniel chapter 1 2 weeks ago, and now the rest of the month we will be in the book of Daniel. So any questions, comments so far? Okay. Daniel chapter 3 today. Daniel chapter 3. And I can't remember how long I have had my copy of that book that we're going to get. I know that it was published somewhere in the early 90s, and I happened to bump into Brother Turner at a funeral of a common friend, which was not the proper place to talk about the book, but I know he also passed away in the early 2000s, I think 2001 or 2002, somewhere along there. So I've had my copy at least since the late 90s, and find it very valuable. Nebuchadnezzar, the king, made an image of gold whose height was 80 cubits and a breadth thereof of 6 cubits. If you've thought about that, that is a large image. Now, there has been a lot of talk about that image, whether it was an image of their god, one of their gods, or an image of Nebuchadnezzar. And depending on which commentary you look at, they've got a lot of good reasons why it's this one, or a lot of reasons why it's that one. If you take that statue at face value, or that image at face value, 80 cubits would be how tall? 90 feet. 6 cubits wide would be how wide? 9 feet. So you're on 90 feet tall, 9 feet wide. That's a 10-to-1 ratio. That is a very skinny monument if you're looking at it from the very bottom to the very top. Now, when I entered the Air Force in 1969, I was almost that image. I was 6'5" and weighed 146 pounds, dripping wet. But if you proportion my shoulders to my height, I am still on about a 6-to-1 ratio versus a 10-to-1 ratio at my thinnest. So a lot of people then want to say, well, it had to be an image of one of their gods. Not necessarily, because it doesn't go into a whole bunch of detail. How tall is the Statue of Liberty? It's well proportioned. Who has seen the Statue of Liberty in person? Nobody? You have? You remember how tall it is? They say it's 305 feet tall, and it is well proportioned. However, the statue is 151 feet. The base is 154 feet. So, if you want to say that this image here that we don't know had a base to it, then it could be a well-proportioned image of Nebuchadnezzar standing on a base. We just don't know. But others, yes, sir.
My picture of the Washington Monument,
And you're fit the Washington.
because that seems to be something that they do in Egypt and throughout Europe and so on. So
Yeah.
it's not
And another part of the conversation comes in, we'll read it a little bit later, but it has to do with worship. In Egypt, a pharaoh was considered a deity. That wasn't the case in Babylon. Kings in Babylon were not considered deity, or Syria or Chaldeans or any of that group. However, when we look at, and this is me drawing conclusions from a bunch of stuff I've been reading in addition to Brother Turner, if you look at Nebuchadnezzar's mindset, what had happened in chapter 2? In chapter 2, Daniel had just told him, you're the head of the things that's going to take place. You're the man. We know how evil he was, and from various other readings and all. If we go back into 2 Kings, around chapter 24, I believe it is, maybe 25, but 2 Kings 24:25, when he brought Zedekiah, killed his son from him, and then put his eyes out, then bound him and took him to Babylon. How cruel does someone have to be to kill children in front of the parent and then put the parent's eyes out? So we know he was not a nice guy. So drawing it all down, my personal opinion from all of this is it very well could have represented Nebuchadnezzar because of his mindset. Now, there's a little warning we need to throw in there. Some of the cuneiform tablets that they have found talking about the law of the country and laws of that time, and we'll get into this also in a couple of weeks when we talk about Daniel and the lion's den. The law was that a person that did not pay the correct homage to a god was put in a fiery furnace, and a person that disrespected a king was thrown into the lion's den. If you want to throw that into the mix, I'm going to leave that decision up to y'all, because all I can do is tell you the various ways people look at things. But what we know from the Bible is that Nebuchadnezzar the king made an image of gold. It was set up in the plain of Dura. Now this is kind of important, because the plain of Dura is about 20 miles or so south of Babylon. There's a place a little bit closer, but it says they put it in the plain of Dura. So they put it in an open spot. It's 90 feet tall, so it could be seen. Gold glistens, so it could be well seen. And what makes that important is when a little bit later we get in and start discussing the furnace. But verse 2 then says, Nebuchadnezzar the king sent together the princes, the governors, the captains, the judges, the treasurers, the counselors, the sheriffs, all the rulers of the provinces to come to the dedication of the image which Nebuchadnezzar the king had set up. If you notice there's 8 different categories of officials. So he is bringing everybody in. Now, I use this to lean a little bit toward that it's an image of the king, Nebuchadnezzar. He wouldn't bring all these people in to dedicate an image to a god, even though he accepted multiple gods, but he had the favorite. So I lean a little bit toward that he's trying to get them to recognize him. But we'll pause there for just a moment, because you know me and timelines and various issues that way. There is nothing in here to indicate when this took place. Now, some of the Greek scholars want it to be in the 18th year of Nebuchadnezzar's reign. Well, when would the 18th year of Nebuchadnezzar's reign have been? If he began in 605, 18 years from 605 is what? $597, 587. What is happening in 587 in that region? Nebuchadnezzar and his group, they have besieged Jerusalem. They don't take them into captivity until 586. That's when he kills Zedekiah's kids. 586. If it's 18 years, now true, kings, they can be multitaskers, but if it's 18 years, he's in the middle of a fight with Jerusalem. So I don't lean much toward that. Personally, I put it a little bit earlier, and that's based on, if we look at the second chapter where Daniel has interpreted a dream and told him that he was the head of gold, it wouldn't be but 2 or 3 years after that, max, I think, that he would have set up an image if it was his image to be recognized. Could be totally off base there. We know it was Belshazzar. Belshazzar was from 605 to 562. So that's our block of time it could be in. Questions, comments, any other study on this, points to bring out? So in verse 3, the princes, the governor, all those people, I'm not going to read them again, they got together. Verse 4, then a herald cried aloud to you, it is commanded, O people, nations, and languages, that at what time ye hear the sound of all the instruments that the king had set up, Whosoever falleth not down and worship shall the same hour be cast into the midst of the burning fiery furnace. Now, this would lead you to believe that it was an image of one of their gods because of the part of worship and what we had just discussed, that the Babylonian kings were not considered deity. However, if he's sort of lost his mind, which he has later, is in that frame of mind, he could be demanding that kind of worship. So you can put that on a balance scale and see which way it tips for you. But the fiery furnace, we'll find out later that 3 people went into the furnace. There was a 4th, and they were walking around, which would make this a huge furnace, a big furnace. So your first question, or my first question was then, did they have those kind of furnaces in Babylon during that period of time? And the answer is yes. Archaeological finds and all, they have found furnaces. And one of the things, I guess you could call it a kiln instead of a furnace, because Nebuchadnezzar was a builder, and he made everything out of fired brick instead of the sun-dried brick, which was stronger. If you're going to kill fire bricks to build walls 60 feet thick and 60 miles long and all like that, you got to have some pretty big furnaces to do all that heating. So there were the furnaces. They did have the technology. They did know about them, and they have found furnaces in that area related to that time frame. Now, questions, comments? Come on, somebody got to have something. Okay. So now the person's going to be punished if they don't go into the furnace. So when all the people heard the sound that Nebuchadnezzar had set up, there, verse 8, wherefore at that time certain Chaldeans came near and accused the Jews. Who were the Chaldeans?
We call those Babylonians too, but weren't they the ones that were it's the ones he called to interpret the dream, couldn't do it.
They were the astrologers, the astronomers, the scientific folks, and the dream interpreters and all. And this is where it gets kind of confusing, and why I have to lay out everything in front of me. And I've got a maps at home that are, well, the old term, I guess, is cellophane overlays. You've got so many things that you can stack on top and see where things are. And if you look in the region of Mesopotamia, which included the Euphrates and the Tigris River and that region all the way down into Babylon, Ur is south of Babylon. And what do we know Ur for? Abraham out of the Ur of the Chaldeans. So in essence, in Mesopotamia, at one time there were the Chaldeans, at another time there were the Assyrians, at another time there were the Babylonians, and they just sort of assimilated together and worked their way through. And the Chaldeans are the scientific, basically, group here. And why do you think that they would be coming and accusing the Jews? 3 particularly when we get down to verse 12. They had been shown up by them, and now here you have, how did people other than Jews look at Jews? Same way they do now. They were dogs. They were not worth anything. They're scum. So here you've got these that were trained in the king's court to serve the king, and they just proved themselves how many times smarter? 10 times smarter than the Chaldeans. So, yeah, I imagine that they'd have a little bit of rub there that, see if they couldn't get rid of him. But then they said, King, hast thou made a decree that every man that shall hear the sound of the cornet, the instruments, fall down and worship? Verse 12, there are certain Jews whom thou hast set over the affairs of the province of Babylon, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. These men, O king, have not regarded thee. They serve not thy gods, nor worship the golden image which thou hast set up. Now this verse is sort of why I'm putting it to be an image of Nebuchadnezzar, because they not only don't worship your gods, they don't worship the image that you set up. Nothing concrete in that. That's just giving you my thoughts on it and what I come to my conclusions. But anyway, why did they not include Daniel in this? If Daniel had been present, Daniel would not have bowed a knee.
He was sitting at the king's gate and not in the courts like the other.
He could have, well, there's a couple of things. One is the king's gate. He was a favorite of the king. So if they now try to incorporate him, what's that going to do to their argument? Don't know if we can go that high, but if we start here, if we get rid of these three, and also the language of this text indicates that Daniel was set over the whole province of Babylon, and these three were set over the province of Babylon, the city proper, instead of the whole territory. Just a loose interpretation of mine. But verse 13 then, Nebuchadnezzar in his rage and fury commanded to bring forth those three and asked, is it true? Do not ye serve my gods, nor worship the golden image which I have set up? Now if ye be ready, that at what time ye hear the sound of the instruments, and you do fall down and worship, all's well. But if you worship not, ye shall be cast that same hour into the midst of the burning fiery furnace. And who is that God that shall deliver you out of my hands? The reason I had mentioned that it was sort of interesting that if it was in the plains 20 miles from the city, there wouldn't be a need for a furnace to fire brick to build the city. But if you recall, I also said that it was punishment at that time for anyone that did not worship their gods the right way. They would be put in a furnace. So they either built a furnace specifically to do that in the side of that image, or they were back in Babylon at the time that all of this took place, when they brought him before the king and the judgment was passed. Save that till we get a little bit farther along. But they refused. And then verse 19, Nebuchadnezzar, full of fury, and his visage was charged against them. Therefore he spake and commanded they should heat the furnace 7 times more than it was wont to be heated. Now, if this was a kiln that they were using to fire brick, bricks are normally fired at around 1200 degrees Fahrenheit. If you heat that 7 times more, you're getting into the 8,000 degree range. Is that possible during this time? Let me rephrase that just a little bit. With all things, with God, all things are possible. But in normal circumstance, could they have fired the furnace to over 8,000 degrees? Not likely. Now, it says 7 times, but you have to look at the Bible here. How many times do numbers represent other things? And 7 is the perfect number during those days. So it could have meant nothing more than heat it as hot as possible. because we know it was hot enough to do damage. Now, don't know if y'all want to know this part or not, but if a human body is going to be cremated, it is normally cremated between the temperatures of 1400 degrees and 2000 degrees, mostly in the 16 to 1800 degree range, and it only takes an hour and a half or 2 hours to completely cremate a body, change it from its form into the dust or the powder. So it would not be necessary to heat it to 8,000 degrees to do what he was wanting to do here. That's just a little bit of thought going in.
I don't know the answer to this, but did they use coal back then, or was it wood fire? I know they had to have some kind of bellows system to make it hot like that.
Yeah, it was their normal method was wood and billows, which gets into the description of the furnace we'll talk about a little bit later. Well, let's just go ahead and talk about it. Normally, they built the furnace up to a mound so they could put things in from the top, but they also had a door, an opening. We won't call it a door like you see furnaces today, but it had an opening so that it could be fueled from beneath because the fire was from beneath. Sort of like if you look at a locomotive, a steam locomotive back in those days, they would have that door open while they were shoveling in the coal or shoveling in the fuel, and all the combustion and all the firing was taking place in there. Verse 20, he commanded the most mighty men that were in his army to bind Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego and to cast them into the burning fiery furnace. Now, this next verse is kind of important too. Then these men were bound in their coats, their hosen, and their hats, and their other garments, and were cast into the midst of the burning fiery furnace. Now, the reason I say that is important is that normally, when they were going to throw somebody into the furnace for disobeying, they would take their clothes off of them and throw just the person in. Why do you think they were bound with clothes?
The urgency of his command.
I'm sorry?
The urgency of his command.
The urgency? I'm sorry?
They could catch on fire, burn faster.
Catch on fire, burn faster? Good answers, but
I think they wanted to get rid of them completely, so they wanted all their stuff to go in there with them.
and what did their clothes represent? Their position. So they are wanting to completely get rid of them and any symbol of the position that they held, or at least that's what I draw from this. Yes, sir.
Back to the fire. How do they know how, once the fire gets so hot, unless you got some type of instrument, you ain't gonna be able to tell when it's so much more degrees, you see what I'm saying? How did they do that?
Well, and this is where I think that it wasn't just a degree, it was the amount. Have you ever been around a forge, a blacksmith's forge, okay. As you put coals will only burn so hot unless they are force-fed
With
air. The same way as A and B tanks on a acetylene torch. So they had the billows, and they was working those billows as hard as they could, and you can tell from color how hot something is. I do some jewelry work. Had a class in silversmithing when I was in Arizona, and you can tell whether it's a blue flame, yellow flame. You can tell degrees by looks there. But if you've got those guys out there pumping those billows just as hard as they can pump them, and you got as much fuel on there as you can load it up with, then when it gets as hot as they can get it, that's the reason I don't think they had, no measurement tools saying anything. It don't take much air to really set things off. Good question, though. Good question. So they were cast into that fire fully clothed because they wanted to get rid of all that symbol and everything. And also the next verse there leads into what Sister Patricia said. Therefore, because the king's commandment was urgent and the fire exceedingly hot, and the flame of the fire slew those men that took up Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. So this evil king, he wasn't caring about anybody, the safety of his people or anything else. All he wanted was those three in that furnace. And they fell down bound into the midst of the burning fiery furnace. And this is where I'm saying that, they had them normally up to a mound where things could be dropped in from the top. You got to be up before you can fall down, right? Then Nebuchadnezzar the king was stoned and rose up in haste and spake and said unto his counselors, Did not we cast 3 men bound into the midst of the fire? The answer was yes. And he said, I see 4 men loose, walking in the midst of the fire, and they have no hurt. And the form of the 4th is like the Son of God. Then Nebuchadnezzar came near the mouth of the burning fiery furnace, and spake and said, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, ye servants of the Most High God, come forth and come hither. Then Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego came forth of the midst of the fire. Near the mouth, well, they fell down from the top. The mouth would be where the fire was, where they fed the fire, and that would be the level where he could see everything in there. So he called them then to come out. And the princes, governors, captains, kings, counselors, being gathered together, saw these men upon whose body the fire had no power, nor was an hair of their heads singed, neither were their coats changed, nor the smell of fire had passed on them. You had mentioned that you had been out fighting brush fires or forest fires. How close do you have to be to that fire before, when you get back to the change of clothes, you smell like wood?
Those clothes don't come in the house.
You don't have to get close at all. So here these men apparently were protected from the very outset to the very end. Didn't have to wait till they got close to the furnace. They were totally protected by God. Again, questions, comments?
We understand, when you just stand around a campfire for just a few minutes, you smell like wood smoke. So, everything about this is miraculous.
Everything. I think this might be a good time to point out something also. This is being written in the third person. Daniel is talking about what was happening here. If you'll look at chapter 10 real quick. In chapter 10, starting with the first verse, it says, In the 3rd year of Cyrus, king of Persia, a thing was revealed unto Daniel. I'm not an English expert. My strong suits are math and history. Andrea is science and English. But this appears to be third person. But as we go along, it says, But the time appointed was long, and he understood the thing, and he had understanding of the vision. In those days, I, Daniel, was mourning 3 full weeks. So he changes from third person to first person in the language. Now, the reason I bring that up is most of the Old Testament is written in what's referred to as third person omniscience. What does that mean? Versus the way we write today, we are third person limited. What's the difference between omniscience and limited? I'm sorry? They know the whole story, whereas the way we write today, it's confined to just what our portion of it is. So most of the Old Testament, well, the New also, is written in that manner that the person speaking knows everything that's going on, even the feelings of the people. You take Jonah and the whale, for instance. How did he know that the sea was calmed after he went in the water and the whale swallowed him? Comes into that all-knowing part instead of. And here in chapter 10, he switches gears because normally in the Bible, when they start talking first person, it is relating to just what they're talking about or what's being said to them. So just threw that in for information. So back to verse 27. The princes, all those people upon whose bodies the fire had no power, no scent, no smell. Verse 28, then Nebuchadnezzar spake and said, Blessed be the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, who has sent his angel and delivered his servant that trusted in him, and have changed the king's word, and yielded their bodies that they might not serve nor worship any god except their own God. Therefore I make a decree that every people, nation, and language which speak anything amiss against the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego shall be cut in pieces. Their houses shall be made a dunghill, because there is no other God that can deliver after this sort. Then the king promoted Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego in the province of Babylon. So, did King Nebuchadnezzar repent and convert? We'll find out later he did not. Another interesting thing about the book of Daniel, and we'll go more into this next week when we get to chapter 5, is that it is not written as a diary. It's not written in chronological form. It's an accumulation. In other words, it's broken out into 3 distinct parts of 4 chapters each. What we have just gone through, chapter 1 through 4, does appear to be in chronological order. When we get to part 2 that we'll be looking at next week, the chapters are mixed up in chronological time. Instead of 5, 6, 7, and 8, it should be 7, 8, 5, 6. And then when we get to part 3, we won't get to part 3, next week and the following week will only be in the second part in chapters 5 and 6. But if you were to look into the last section, last part, chapter 9, 10, 11, and 12, the actual chronological order appears to be 11, 10, 12, 9. So that's one reason that I spend a great deal of my time trying to put things in chronological order, just to have them make sense for me. Questions, comments? We got about 5 minutes that we can discuss anything on this chapter or anything else. Brother Golden.
It's interesting to me in 325 that Nebuchadnezzar calls that fourth one the sun, or is like the sun god. Seems to me that seems odd that he knows about the sun god.
Well, they knew about a lot of religions, and he had already made Daniel his favorite there in chapter 2. If we look back at chapter 2, starting with verse 47, the king answered unto Daniel and said, Of a truth it is that your God is a God of gods and a Lord of kings, and a revealer of secrets, seeing thou revealest this secret. Then the king made Daniel a great man and gave him many gifts, made him ruler over the whole province of Babylon, and chief of the governors over all the wise men of Babylon. Then Daniel requested of the king, and he set Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego over the affairs of the province of Babylon. But Daniel sat in the gate of the king. So he had already admitted in chapter 2 that your God is the God. But then he goes around and wants them to worship his God, which results in those three being punished. So.
He believed, but he didn't ever obey.
He did not act wisely. He did not put knowledge to use, I guess you could say. Yeah. Anything else? Yes, ma'am.
You made the comment that either they built the furnace for punishment or they had come back to Babylon proper. With him building this out in the plain and calling so many people there, would there not have probably been a lot of commerce that sprang up around that, possibly the need to build things? I mean, they could have just built a furnace to start making brick for all the structures that were going up around it.
They built fiery pits around temple areas, so if they said, let me clarify that. I did not mean that they specifically built a furnace for these three, but they could have built a furnace out there because of what was there, and then that's where they put them or brought them back to the city. So I might have hit on it not hard enough either about the timing, but there was about a 10-year siege on Jerusalem where Nebuchadnezzar's time was off a little bit. So, like I said, I just can't agree with it being 18 years. I think it was a shorter period of time. And if you look at chapter 1, 2, 3, and 4 in connection with each other, if you'll go back to chapter 1, at the very end of chapter 1, 3 years have passed, and they are now show themselves to be 10 times greater than the Chaldeans. And then Daniel continued even to the first year of Cyrus. Then if you look at chapter 2, the beginning of chapter 2, it says, in the second year of the reign of Nebuchadnezzar. So, that is not a smooth flow there. Chapter 2 backs up and starts in his second year instead of picking up in his fourth year to tell the story. And we do that all the time. When we're talking, I'll use David as an example. We can be having a conversation about one thing, and we will take it all the way from A to Z. And then one of us might say something different and start us on a whole nother conversation that we have to go all the way back before what we started on. We don't talk in chronological time. We talk in events. And here, chapter 1, Daniel is following an event from beginning to end, setting it up. And then in chapter 2, where he goes back to start the second. So his dream could have happened while they were still being trained, but it didn't culminate to the end until after they had graduated from class and been enrolled, because you really need to read chapter 2 because it sort of walks you through this, that he had this dream. He was calling all these people in. They were not able to answer the question. They were sent away, brought back, sent away. Then he ordered them all killed. Then they went looking for Daniel and his group. Why were they sort of put off here on the side? Because they hadn't fully integrated into the whole group yet. So I take chapter 2, started in the second year, but the culmination of it was maybe 4 or 5 years into it, so that Daniel, they had graduated from their position. If they'd got there when they was, say, 17, 20, now they're in their 20s and they can be put in charge of all these things. So there's certain things that we cannot nail down as a time frame, but I think that's a easy way to look at the flow. That he had the dream maybe when they were still being trained, but Daniel interpreted it after they had graduated, hadn't been fully integrated into that group yet. Then they went immediately from there into being in charge. And that's where it goes back to, I forgot who said it now. I'll get to you in just a second. That when the Chaldeans wanted to pick on those three, it was because that they had just come out of being trained, no experience in addition to being elevated to that position. Yes, Brother Governor.
Babylonians' power, or captives of Babylonia, for about 2 years. I see about it, because 586 they were officially captives, and then 539 the Persians overran the Babylonians, and then 536 they started going back to their homeland.
Yes, sir. We're going to look at 539 next week, and we're going to find out that I'll give you a teaser on that because of some of the cuneiform prisms and all that's been found, cylinders. We're going to find out that Darius entered Babylon on the 12th of October, and that Cyrus came in on the 27th of October. That's a teaser for you. Thank y'all so much.